Assalamualaikum and a very good day to Dr. Azhar. We are from Group A8 and we are going to present about Amway Malaysia Holdings Berhad and Chong Motor Holdings Berhad. I will begin my presentation with the introduction of the companies. Amway Malaysia Holdings Berhad is one of the top 10 performing affiliates in the Amway Global Network with the excellent metrics, including the sales turnover, profitability, and also a strong Amway business owner ABO force. Amway Malaysia has extended its network of Amway retail shops in Malaysia and Brunei, as well as 3 regional warehouse centers to serve the operations of its ABOs. In addition to that, Amway is a top company in the world and a big listed company on Bursa Malaysia market since 1996. One of their subsidiaries, Amway Malaysia, is founded by Mike Duong and has started their business in 1976 under the license of Ministry of Domestic Trade and Consumer Affairs (MDTCA). For the main business activities of the companies, Amway Malaysia Holdings Berhad is an investment holding company established in Malaysia. The flagship product is the distribution of consumer goods that mostly under the Amway brand itself. Amway Malaysia came out with an idea of selling a wide range of products such as healthcare products, skincare and cosmetics, personal care, home care, and even home technologies.
Okay, in here I want to introduce or want to explain about Chong Motor Holding Berhad, or like we know is TCMH. TCMH was founded on October 14, 1972 in Malaysia. TCMH Group, the group, has grown from the humble beginning as a distributor of small motor vehicles by its founder in the 1950s to a large conglomerate involved a variety of the business activity, ranging from the assembly and marketing of motor vehicles and auto part manufacturing to property investment and trading in various heavy machineries, industrial equipment, and consumer products, both locally and international. Chong Motor Holding Berhad is the holding company for investment, vehicle assembly, manufacture, distributor, and after-sales service, financial service. The description product from Chong Motor Holding Berhad is they have one is Nissan, Renault, Attract, and the King Long. They ever get awards, and the award they get is Chong Group Award and the Malaysia Card of the Year. That's at awards from 2017.
Next, we will proceed to the ratios for both companies. For the first one, I will be presenting about liquidity ratios. Liquidity ratios are a type of financial indicator that is used to assess a debtor's capacity to repay current debts, obligations, without having to raise additional funds. For current ratio, this ratio measures the short-term debts paying ability to a company to repay short-term or 1-year obligations. As we can see in the slide, the formula for current ratio is current assets divided by current liabilities. For Amway Malaysia Holdings Berhad, the current ratio is 1.461. That means Amway Malaysia Holdings Berhad has RM 1.46 of current assets for every RM1 current liability. Meanwhile, for Chong Motor Holdings Berhad, the current ratio is 1.011. That means Chong Motor Holdings Berhad has RM 1.01 of current assets for every RM1 current liability. As the result, for every RM1 of current debts, Chong Motor Holdings Berhad has RM 1.01 available to pay for the debts. Amway, meanwhile, had RM 1.46 in current assets for each ringgit to current liabilities. In other words, the ability of Amway Malaysia Holdings Berhad to pay short-term debts is stronger compared to Chong Motor Holdings Berhad. For quick ratio, this ratio is a measure of a company's capacity to satisfy short-term obligations with its most liquid assets and is an indicator of its short-term liquidity positions. As we can see in the slide, the formula for quick ratios is quick assets divided by current liabilities. For Amway Malaysia Holdings Berhad, the quick ratio is RM 0.81. That means Amway Malaysia Holdings Berhad has 81 cents of current assets that can convert it into cash immediately for every RM1 current liability. Meanwhile, for Tan Chong Motor Holdings Berhad, the quick ratio is RM0.51. That means Tan Chong Motor Holdings Berhad has 51 cents of current assets that can convert it into cash immediately for every RM1 ringgit current liability. As a result, Amway Malaysia Holdings Berhad has 81 cents of quick assets for every RM1 current liability, which is more than Tan Chong Motor Holdings Berhad that only has 51 cents. Amway Malaysia Holdings Berhad has more liquidity assets to pay short-term liabilities compared to Tan Chong Motor Holdings Berhad.
I will be presenting the activity ratio. Activity ratio is a financial indicator that shows how effectively a company generates their revenue and cash from its balance sheet's assets. The first ratio that is under the activity ratio is inventory turnover, which defines as a financial ratio that shows how many times the company replaces the inventory in a financial year. The formula of inventory turnover is cost of goods sold divided by average inventory. The outcome of Amway Malaysia Holdings Berhad is 7 times, which means that the company replaced their inventory 7 times in a year, while Tan Chong Motor Holdings Berhad has only twice a year, which means that Tan Chong Motor Holdings Berhad replace all their inventory sold twice a year. To conclude the comparison between these both companies is that Amway Malaysia Holdings Berhad has more efficient in inventory management, or can be said that their sales is better than Tan Chong Motor Holdings Berhad. The second ratio under activity ratio is total asset turnover. The total assets turnover is to measure how valuable a company's assets in comparison to its sales and revenue. The formula for total assets turnover ratio is net sales divided by average total assets. After the calculation, we can see that the total assets turnover ratio for Amway is about 2.49, which is also can be said as 2 times. This means that for every ringgit Malaysia invested in total assets, Amway is able to generate about twice of its sales, while Tan Chong Motor Holdings Berhad 0.53, which also can be said as 1 time. This means that Tan Chong Motor can generate their sales once for every ringgit Malaysia invested in their assets. We can see that Amway is better and more efficient than Tan Chong Motor Holdings Berhad. The last ratio under activity ratio is account receivable turnover. It is an accounting metric that measures how a company collects its receivable or money owed by their customers or clients. The formula for account receivable turnover is net sales divided by average trade receivables. For Amway Malaysia Holdings Berhad is 29.42, which is also can be said as 29 times, while Tan Chong Motor Holdings Berhad is 11.27, which also can be said as 11 times. This means that Amway has collected its receivable for 29 times over the fiscal year, while Tan Chong Motor Holdings Berhad has collected its receivable for 11 times over the fiscal year. This shows that Amway Malaysia Holdings Berhad has a better credit policy management, or can be said as their receivables need to pay back compared to Tan Chong Motor Holdings Berhad.
For profitability ratios are a set of financial indicators that are used to evaluate a company's ability, or in the other words, company's potential to create earnings over time in relation to its revenue, operational costs, balance sheet assets, or shareholders' equity, utilizing data from certain point in time. The next one is profit margin on sales. Profit margin is the ratio of profit remaining from sales after all expenses have been paid. As we can see in the slide, the formula for profit margin on sales is net income divided by net sales. For Amway Holdings Malaysia Berhad, the profit margin on sales is 5.4%. That is mean the business managed to generate the profit gain of 0.05 cent for every ringgit worth of sales, while for Tan Chong, the profit margin on sales is minus 6%. The business managed to incur loss worth 0.0 cents for every ringgit worth of sales. As the result is, although Amway Malaysia Holding Berhad has low profit, but is still much better than Tan Chong Motor because the company made losses of 6% compared to Amway that can convert their sales into 5% profit. Next is return on assets. It refers to a financial ratio that indicates how profitable a company is in relation to its total assets. As we can see in the slide, the formula for return on assets is net income divided by average total assets. For Amway Malaysia Holding Berhad, the return assets is 10.12%. This means that for every ringgit in assets, Amway earned 10 cents, while for Chong, return on asset is negative 3.17. This means that for every ringgit in assets, Chong Motor Holding Berhad incurred a loss of 3 ringgit and 70 cents. As the result is, Amway Malaysia Holding Berhad has the ability to use assets to generate profits more efficiently than the Chong Motor Holdings Berhad. This is because Amway generate profit at 10 cents by using their assets, while Chong Motor incur a loss of 3 ringgit and 70 cents. Next, leverage ratio are used to determine the relative level of debt load that a business has incurred. These ratios compare the total debt obligation to either the assets or equity of a business. For debt to assets ratio, also known as the debt ratio, is a leverage ratio that indicates the percentage of assets that are being financed with debt. The higher the ratio, the greater the degree of leverage and financial risk. The formula is total liabilities divided by total assets. As we look at Amway, the ratio indicates 54 cents of the assets of Amway Holding Berhad are funded by 1 ringgit debt, while for Chong, this ratio indicates 47 cents of the assets of Chong Motor Holding Berhad are funded by 1 ringgit debt. As the result is, Amway has a lower business risk such as defaulting on loans which can be beneficial compared to Chong Motor Holding Berhad. This is because the assets of Amway is more.
Here comes the very last part of ratio, that is debt to equity ratio. It is also can be called as debt equity ratio, risk ratio, or gearing. This ratio highlights how a company's capital structure is tilted either towards debt or equity. The formula for debt to equity ratio is total debt divided by owner's equity. We have found that Amway has a current ratio of 1.16 to 1, means that the liabilities of shareholders' equity provides 1 ringgit 60 cents for every ringgit to finance the assets, while Chong has only 0.88 to 1. This shows that Amway has a better ability in coping with long-term debts and also reduce more risk compared to Chong Motor Holdings Berhad.
The conclusion from our assignment is the purpose of this assignment is to compare and analyze the performance of the companies, and that's the Chong Motor Berhad and the Amways, and to explain the development of the major concept. That's mean liquidity ratio, activity ratio, profitability ratio, and leverage ratio. Following the ratio of the debt of the equity ratio, the Amway's Holding Berhad at the around 1.16 is higher than Chong Motor Holding Berhad is at 0.88. This shows that Amway's Holding Berhad has a better ability to cope with long-term debt and also reduce more risk than Chong Motor Holdings. Thank you everyone and see you.